Hello. Can everybody hear me? Hello, thank you for coming. My name is Brian Gillis. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Art, and I coordinate the ceramics area here with my colleague Stacy Jo Scott. It's my pleasure to introduce Salvador Jiménez-Flores for today's lecture titled Nepantla. Before continuing, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilhi, the traditional homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their land by the United States government and forcibly removed to the coast reservations in western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederate Tribes of the Grand Ronde community of Oregon and the Confederate Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at the U of O and across the lands we now refer to as Oregon, the United States, and to the world. In acknowledging the original people of the land we occupy, we extend our respect to the indigenous people of Oregon and all other displaced indigenous people who call Oregon home. With today's talk and our collective activity, we recognize Oregon's first people as the past, present, and future stewards of this land, and we pledge our commitment to make ongoing efforts to center indigenous existence in the work we do. I'd also like to extend this commitment to people who may not have directly been impacted by settler colonialism on sites currently inhabited by the University of Oregon, yet have been systematically oppressed, denied access, physically and psychologically abused for generations by the very structures and mechanisms that have afforded the University of Oregon and so many of our students, staff, and faculty opportunities to thrive. As such, we pledge continued commitment to support and make ongoing efforts to center the best interests of BIPOC individuals and communities in our work. While I fully believe in the practice of acknowledging the land we occupy as agents of the institution, I'm increasingly uncomfortable with the ways this allows institutions to less urgently address historical issues caused by colonialism that are still present in the lived experiences of individuals and communities. With this land acknowledgement today, I'd also like to publicly acknowledge the toxic potentials that both institutional and individual virtue signaling may have on a range of people and groups. And I would like to call attention to the responsibility those of us who benefit from a relationship to the University of Oregon and established structures of power have to continue to work beyond statements to do the work to support people on their terms. Additionally, by acknowledging the land we occupy, I'd also like to propose a form of collective gratitude for the ability to be here today on this land, in the relative safety of this building, with the benefit, which benefits from a great deal of resources and freedoms that have allowed us all the privilege to assemble under the auspices of intellectual exchange and inquiry. Now to introduce Salvador, I'm so excited to learn more about his thinking and practice through today's talk. In lieu of an introduction describing his work and all of his academic propers, things you can all find on the web, I'd like to tell you why we decided to invite him to come here. While I've only recently come to know Salvador personally a little bit, we've long been orbiting each other, and I've been so moved by the degree to which his work, teaching, and organizing has impacted individuals and institutions in the field of craft and ceramics and beyond. I know this work to be led with incredible generosity, empathy, and care, involving brilliant, creative, and supported positions, amazing grit and determination, and a certain way of operating that's rooted in a blend of focused dissent and open collaboration with those holding power. In so many ways, Salvador is the prototypical citizen, artist, academic, and I'm so grateful for the occasion to have him here in our community for a bit. So please join me in welcoming Salvador.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you to the art department for the invitation and for being such a good host. I had the opportunity to visit some of the grad students and do the tour of the studios, and got the opportunity to speak with some of the grad students. And it is amazing what you all do as artists, and also sharing your work, opening the doors to your studio. There is such an aspect of being vulnerable and sharing your ideas and thoughts, and that's very brave of any maker to do that. I will attempt to do that here with this lecture. The way I see my practice is an amalgamation of the artist, the educator, and the citizen. And I will kind of like step at each of those categories. What I like about these three categories is how they create this energy for me to continue to make work, to be interested in sharing space, sharing technique, sharing practice with other colleagues, friends, and students. And I also appreciate how this keeps me hopeful, curious, playful, and allows me to take risk. So I'm always interested in how these three categories overlap in my practice, and also how they fuel each other for me to be able to recover and get energy to continue to do the community-based work, the academic work, as well as my artistic practice. So I decided to title this talk Nepantla. I wonder how many of you Google that word? No one? Okay. Well, Nepantla is a concept used in Chicano and Latino anthropology, social commentary, criticism, literature, and art. It represents a concept of in-betweenness. And this is a Nahuatl word, which means in the middle of it, or in the middle. And just before I dive into some of the slides of my work, it is important to share where I'm coming from. This is Jamay, Jalisco, Mexico, where I was born and raised until age 15. And then also keep in mind I guess having more understanding of our history and how people migrate through these lands for various reasons. My great-grandfather was part of the Traquero program, which essentially was Mexican nationals who came and worked in the railroads in the United States, from 1870 to 1930s. And I did a lithography, kind of like getting a sense of who my great-grandfather was. And this is from a very blurry picture, but my aunt shared this picture and was telling me that this was the first time that he got to wear closed shoes, because he would always wear huaraches, like Mexican leather sandals. And he was really proud in this chair with his boots, and I just wanted to highlight that and get a little bit of a glimpse of the type of work that he probably did for the States during that time. Another piece of history is the Bracero program, which my father was part of. And he came and worked on the fields in California to harvest and to aid with all the work that was needed here in the States. And you can see some of the flyers that were promoting like this friendly welcoming of Mexican labor. And then the other aspect that have motivated my family to move around was the North America Free Trade Agreement that happened, in this case in 1994. And that's when my father decided, after we had settled in Mexico, to migrate back to the States. Luckily, we had the means to come to this country documented, but nonetheless, he was always thinking about the future and how he could present us with better opportunities. So a lot of my work deals with this idea of what happens between these two countries, right? The United States, Mexico, and also acknowledging all the land that used to belong to Mexico, and before it was Mexico, it was indigenous land. So, as the artist, I have the responsibility to use my craft to address issues that affect my community, create awareness, and propose actions through my art. I wanted to start sharing some of the work that I did during my MFA program, since I got the opportunity to share or to learn from some of your students. And I came to working with clay in a kind of like an unconventional way. My master's was in drawing, but I decided to take ceramics as an elective. And from that moment on, I just really connected with that material. And I felt like I was able to transmit my ideas better through that material. So this is some of the work that I was creating during that time. As you can see on this setup, it's designed in a timeline format, but it really doesn't have a linear way of reading it. And with this, I created a mold of my face, and then I would press clay, different types of clay bodies, and then every one of those casts was an opportunity to reinvent myself or think about my identity and explore all these assigned identities, and also the ones that I chose to wear. And I'm not gonna go and talk about each of them because I would take too long. But just to give you an idea of what was going through my mind during those years, it's well, I'll read this quote. A peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of other, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on and amuse, contempt, and pity. One ever feels this two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled striving, two wearing ideals in one dark body whose dog strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. To me, this is a book that I really resonated, and especially thinking about my identity as an immigrant and coming to United States and still feeling like occupying this life of domestic alienness. So to borrow from W.E.B. Du Bois, that was kind of like I was able to connect with some of the writers, and for me this was important because this is when I came across this text when I was at a community college, and that was actually the only professor of color that I had throughout my whole academic studies. So just to kind of give you a perspective of the importance of representation and inclusion in school and in academia. So from there, I was able to create work that reflected this idea of being in between these two worlds or these two personalities and finding the space in between. And also having fun with language and thinking about labels and stereotypes. When I first came to the States, I came by bus, and I remember having my resident alien card, whatever they call it, but it was just hilarious to me to think about it and how people would always just see me as an alien or as the other. And with this, I was also interested in talking about different events in the history of Mexico and kind of like embracing those identities. And one thing that I do in this work is the use of language and mistranslation, or sometimes the lack of translation, for people to identify in different ways with it. Another thing that I wanted to do with this work was to literally stain the white walls of the museum with clay slip. And then once again, thinking about the words of Gloria Ansaldúa, living between two cultures results in seeing double. First from the perspective of one culture, then from the perspective of another. Seeing from two or more perspectives simultaneously renders those cultures transparent. Remove from that culture's center, you glimpse to the sea in which you will be immersed, but to which you were oblivious, no longer seeing the world the way you were, enculturated to see it. So to me, this was a big experience, moving to Grand Rapids and having like another cultural shock. Like, I was one of the very few people of color in the college, and to me this reflected my experience and like assimilating to a white bread West Michigan. And at the end of this body of work, essentially, it's this idea of accepting who I am, with that piece, Soy Quien Soy. And then this piece, Leer Quita Lo Pendejo, is kind of like with that idea of all the research and books that I was reading during that time, and kind of like depicting that through that. And then sometimes as artists, we end up doing jobs that we're not trained for, but if you're open to that opportunity, that could lead to interesting conversations. I did a lot of work for that college, doing a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion task force and different things like that. In one of those, I had to do some meetings with the Museum of Grand Rapids, and they were asking me like, well, how can we get more Latinx folks to come to the museum? And I just asked them, well, have you looked at your permanent collection? And I think they started thinking about that. And after I had a show there, they decided to purchase these 3 pieces for their permanent collection. And since then, they've been getting more people. So once again, Nepantla, in the constant state of mental nepatilism, and that's the word meaning torn between ways, La Mestiza is a product of the transfer of cultural and spiritual values of one group to another. So after grad school, I ended up doing a residency at the Harvard Ceramics program, where I got the opportunity to literally study some of the pre-Columbian works and make work based on that. And this was like the culmination of my 2 years there, titled Nadie Descubrió las Américas. And once again, I wanted to claim space by using the red terracotta slip on the walls and creating this map and kind of like this kind of baggage that I was carrying with this work. And then later on, this 2016 happened. Obviously, a lot of things happened in our country politically, and the political climate was just overwhelming. And I decided to make work that was more about the kind of like using art as a bridge to thinking of new realities for my community, for people of color, and for me, the cactus symbolizes this resistance that can survive a lot of weather and harsh conditions. So I wanted to use that metaphor, but also combine it with this surrealistic approach and hybrid these components in a way that that I was being playful, but also kind of like responding to what was going on in our country during that time. And then this ended up becoming a series of work that I'm still developing. And then also another thing to keep in mind about this, thinking about the limitations, when I had a studio in Boston was really small. So my idea was to work in a larger scale. And based on those limitations, I just had to work in a more modular way. So all these pieces come apart and they turn out to be really efficient to travel the work around. Let's see. And this is another project that I call Quiche Americana, where I combine quiche molds from the internet that I can purchase, cast clay slip, but then manipulate them. In this case, I'm removing the head of the eagle and adding one of a superhero. And I'm making this superhero to be more like me, right? Thinking about science fiction, we do see a lack of representation of people of color being like the heroes in those settings. So I just wanted to create my own superheroes, but also kind of like document the darkness of our history as this country as well. Then this piece was kind of like very inspired by all the uprisings in 2020. That's when I started making this, and it also kind of like exploded on the kiln, but I felt like there was something that was happening on that piece that I decided to save it, and that was probably part of it, like all the craziness that was going on in our world. So I decided to revisit it and finish it last year. Let me see. This was for an exhibition about drinking vessels, thinking about the animal vessels that were used in Greece. And this was my response to, I guess, the rhetoric of Donald Trump saying that Mexicans were rapists and bad hombres and all that kind of stuff. Let's see, how are we doing on time? This other piece is about environmental racism. I got a grant to do research and create a community-based project based on my neighborhood. At this time, I was living in Little Village. And during that time, and even now, there was a lot of environmental racism happening in that neighborhood. And during the pandemic, this community was already suffering a lot of respiratory issues based on the pollution that was already existing there. But during the pandemic, they decided to take down a coal plant that was there for many years, and it kind of like erupted like this cloud of dirt and a lot of pollution. So a lot of the residents ended up, also getting COVID and dying. So that was kind of like, it's really sad, but that was kind of like a memorial to that community. And I will talk a little bit more about the community component of that project. So then I was able to do a residence at the Kohler Art Center, and it's literally, they carve out a space, a studio space inside a factory. So it's you and all this heavy equipment that you get trained for. I didn't know anything about foundry, and after 3 months, I was able to do some work there. This one is titled American Dream. So this is the same eagle that I used previously. I was able to make it into a mold, and I was able to make these medallions. this was an interesting piece because the original, it actually has corn kernels that I glue onto a plastic replica of a skull. And even my father helped me do this. So to me, this is kind of like hinting to all the problematic things that happen with Monsanto kind of like modifying all these crops. And then this was the major piece that I was able to accomplish there. I made all these components in a similar way that I was working in clay, and I ended up making threads on all these components to be screwed onto each other. And then I sat with this work for a while, and then I had this exhibition coming up, and I ended up collecting all the different pieces that didn't make it to that big one, and I ended up making the smaller versions of that. And then it turned out into this installation where once again I was able to use the clay slip as a way of laying out this diagram for the pieces to sit on. This was at the ground for sculpture. And then this is a separate piece that I just sent to a different show, and it was just an opportunity to keep playing with this idea where I was able to do these drawings in my studio, send the clay slip and instructions to the gallery, and then have volunteers do the illustrations. So it was like a nice collaboration. And now this leads to another piece that I started working on. That is turning into a body of work of monuments and memorials, and they're decent scale, but ideally, it would be great if this were twice or three times the size. And this one is called Hand Gesture to Systemic Racism. Al que le quede el saco que se lo ponga. And this is really kind of like after doing all this volunteer work of diversity, equity, and inclusion for several institutions. It was just this frustration of always kind of like talking about this, using all these buzzwords and acronyms, but at the end there wasn't that many actions, right? Like this idea of, we like the idea of talking about it because it makes us feel good, but we don't put it forward with actions. So that was my response to that piece. And then I was invited for this other group show called Funk You 2 that is coming up at the Museum of Art and Design in New York. And that was really inspired by this, by The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, and especially this quote. What one does realize is that when you try to stand up and look the world in the face as if you had the right to be here, you have attacked the entire power structure of the Western world. I just thought that was such a potent quote that motivated me to do this piece. And I think this piece kind of shows that transition, right? The idea of coming to this country, feeling inferior, feeling that like I don't belong, being categorized as the other or as alien, and then little by little transforming into someone who is just comfortable being who I am and overcoming those obstacles. And a little preview of something that I'm working on the studio. I got this award, the Richard Hunt Award. Richard Hunt is an amazing abstract sculptor from Chicago. If you have a time to look him up, please do. It's just outstanding work. And they gave me a public commission to create this piece, and I'm in the process of finishing the mold and then going to the foundry and work on the wax, so then it can later become a bronze piece. So once again, this is like a very small budget. I wanted to make it bigger, but the budget just made this piece, at a smaller scale. But also just learning more about how I can get work in the public realm. it's been, I'm really grateful for this opportunity and see how in the future I could probably take this to maybe other opportunities for public art. Now, as a citizen, I believe that social change starts within oneself and that it takes community and relationships to manifest the change we want to see. Together, we can create a more equitable and just society. So one of the things that I enjoy doing, it's community work. It's getting together with folks who have a vision or have an idea and make that happen. And a lot of those things happen based on necessity. The first one is Instituto Gráfico de Chicago, a collective that I've been part of for over 10 years. And it just started with different educators and artists from Pilsen in Chicago who wanted to share the tradition of printmaking and also inspired by the Taller de Gráfica Popular with this social and political conscious. And we decided to just organize a few print portfolio exchanges, and ever since then we've done that. And then these are some of the prints that I have done for that group. But we also create this other festival called Grabadolandia, where we invite different printmakers from the Chicago vicinity, and we encourage them to sell their prints, and all we ask is that they teach a printmaking technique to the audience. And this is really fascinating in the sense that you get kids, parents, grandparents buying prints, making prints, and it's all free for to the public. And that's all the printmakers and volunteers. The other organization that I'm part of is the Kohler Network. Once again, an organization that came out of necessity. During all my schooling, I just noticed the lack of representation of ceramic of color, or on the slides from a lot of the lectures, they were just, I didn't see myself represented in those. And the same with some of the other co-organizers. So we decided to create this database, and essentially later on became a mentor-mentee program. And we've been doing this for about 5 years. And since then, we've been able to provide more scholarships for students of color to go and study in some of these craft schools, but also do micro grants and create different opportunities for mentors and mentees. As an educator, I want to impact the lives of my students in a positive way and inspire new generations of artists to continue guiding forthcoming generations, creating an unbroken chain of shared knowledge. To me, I never thought I would become a teacher or an educator, but I was always open to the opportunities that came on my way, or the things that I would seek for. As soon as I finished my bachelor's in graphic design, I was visiting, I was doing a studio tour, and I just introduced myself to this organization, Yolocali Arts Reach, and I shared my resume, and I was like, hey, I just finished school. I wasn't even, I guess I was just giving my resume to different people. And someone picked it up, and they decided like, hey, we're doing this mural class. Are you interested in teaching and working with the youth? And I had 0 teaching experience, but I said yes. And then I was paired up with Ricardo Santos Hernandez, a good friend and mentor. And I really enjoy working with him. And I learned a lot of the teaching style from him. And he always set high expectations for the students, and always stay super positive about the ideas that they wanted to do. And this mural ended up a combination of poetry, videos, lights, paper mache, sculpture, lighting, and we kind of like almost put everything on it. And this was really important for me because I was one of those kids who took an after school program in photography, and that really changed the way I was looking at the world, and it was a coping mechanism for me to deal with this transition of coming to the States. So for me to be able to teach and give back to the community through this program was really rewarding, and it was this idea of going full circle. And after co-teaching that program, I was invited to teach and lead my own projects. The idea of these projects are project-based learning. So we have a deadline. We have to cover the principles of art and design and learn as we create this project. So this was part of the hospital. This was another mural that we created. This was actually the first time that I worked with ceramics without knowing anything about ceramics. So once again, I never done mosaics, I never worked with ceramics. I got invited to do this project, and I just said yes. Mm-hmm. And after that, we created with that same community of students this other mural. And this mural is still there. It's a little rough, but unfortunately, like the message of this mural is still very relevant, and we're talking about 12 years ago. This is a project that I did in Boston with third graders. The idea was to leave something behind in the school, and the students decided to create prints and then collage them into this accordion that later was installed at the school. So the great thing about this that everyone kept one or two of their prints, but also contributed to the mural. And then another project was Tortilla Social. And for this one, I'm just gonna play a video.
Tortilla Social is a participatory project that transforms public spaces. We use printmaking as a tool for self-expression, arts education, and food as uniter of community. It is a mobile project that features a multifunctional tortilla press. We engage participants of all ages in making art, tortillas, and conversations about the needs and wants of the community.
Resident, green card holder. So I came here when I was 7 years old. I was undocumented for most of my life until I got DACA in 2014, and then with DACA I was able to go to college. I don't know, I feel like with art, I'm able to take a piece of Mexico with me, that some of the things that represent it today.
This is a collaborative and participatory project that makes art inclusive and accessible to all. The combination of art and food fosters new relationships between community members and the arts. We bring art to the people in places like parks, community centers, and unconventional spaces. By doing so, we reimagine places where art can happen, build spaces for public imagination, and create meaningful civic experiences.
So Tortilla Social essentially is a social sculpture that is tortillera. The premise of this project was to use printmaking and food as cultivators for dialogue about the different social issues that are affecting our community.
I think that's the internet. Anyways, I'm just gonna stop it. but you kind of get an idea. And this project was possible by this amazing organization in Boston called Urbano Project, and they were crucial to a crucial component to make this project happen. And the thing about Tortilla Social was this, essentially this sculpture that we can activate by making tortillas or pre-making. And then we had a component where we also share a meal at a table. And I think that was such a good way of a great equalizer for everyone to share their experience and have like no hierarchies. And the great thing about this project is also that it's portable and we can take it to different places, making art more accessible. So this is the older project that I mentioned earlier, Arcilla Arte Cultura. This also happened during the pandemic, unfortunately. So we ended up having to improvise and created ceramic kits. We delivered them to the families who were interested in doing this workshop. We did it virtually, and then we will go and pick up the work, fire it in the kiln, bring it back to them, and document the work. I will share a quick video. Hopefully this one doesn't stop. But just to kind of like give you an idea of what we did. And then once the pandemic was a little bit better and allowed us to do things in person, one of my former students, Vani Aguilar, was able to help me and then also ended up teaching and leading this class at its school. And then we had this celebration that culminated the end of the grant cycle. And even now, we still try to figure out how can we continue with this community work beyond the grant cycle. Because now we don't have money from this organization, Threewalls. So now it's like, how can we make it sustainable? And so once again, I see my art practice with the role of the artist, the citizen, and the educator. And for me, these three components are important to keep doing what I'm doing. And I guess I would like to finish with this quote. For this book that Gloria Anzaldúa wrote, the borders were very physical, right? Mexico and the United States. But I want to read this part. The psychological borders, the sexual borders, and the spiritual borders are not particular to the Southwest. In fact, the borders are physically present wherever two or more cultures edge each other, where people of different races occupy the same territory, where under, lower, middle, and upper class touch, where the space between two individuals shrink within intimacy. And I guess I want to leave you with the question, like, what are those internal or external borders that you deal with on a regular basis? And that's it. Thank you. Have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, it is the same mold, and for me that was also thinking about the mold conceptually, like how can I make the same cast out of this mold but yet make it unique. And to me that also symbolizes the layers and the complexities of every individual, right? Not only racialized groups, but just every one of us have all these different complexities. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you for this amazing talk. I was curious about the choice of ceramic.
Mhm. That's a great question. And you know, the thing about art making is it's I think being open to everything. And to me, I could say that maybe I came into ceramics by accident, because before I went to grad school, and now a colleague of mine, Nicole Marroquin, who teaches at the School of the Art Institute, had a clay marathon, and she just invited artists to make bowls, to do an empty bowl, but we decided to call it pozolada. So we will make different bowls, and then people buy it and they get pozole with it. And I went and I stayed, I think, until 4 a.m. And in that same day, we did a mold. I tried the wheel. I did terrible. And then I coil built some pots and donated them. And after that, I called the school where I was gonna go for grad school and asked them to change one of my electives to be ceramics. And that's when I met Israel Davis, who is a friend and mentor. And he really encouraged me to work with clay more and more. And then just for me, in my own research, I guess, this idea of ceramics and clay being this material that have been part of our lives for millennia. And it's been part of every cultural group. And to me, just such a wonderful material that we can still use it and address and talk about the issues that we're facing today. And to me, I felt like, I guess in a romantic way, I felt almost like a transgenerational knowledge was passed on once I started touching that clay. My master's was in drawing, so I felt like it was the more direct way of getting an idea into paper. And I felt the same way about working with clay, but now in a three-dimensional form and shaping kind of like your own reality. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could tell us more about the role of futurism within the Rasquache framework.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed you have that in some of your slides. So.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Rasquache is this word in Spanish that it could be translated as someone who is resourceful or making do with what's available. And to me, that was something that I'm interested in that aesthetic. But then also the idea of futurism, I'm thinking about how can I create this idea of world building, but also thinking with what's available, right? Thinking about the future allows me to just be more free in my studio and kind of like combine materials or elements that they don't seem like they belong, but by adjusting how I present it, like they make sense at some point. So to me, this idea of Rasquache futurism is this aesthetic that I'm trying to develop, where I start incorporating more ready-mades with ceramics or with metal, but with that kind of like magical realism approach, something that seems like impossible, but it still has this realism component. Did that answer your question? But it was very inspired by Afrofuturism and the music and films by Sun Ra, and also the clay component, like bringing humor and politics to it. It's kind of like combining some of the pioneers from funk ceramics, like Robert Anderson and Patti Wadashimna, another ceramic artist, and things like that. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I was wondering how you assemble your ceramics so they're made of multiple parts.
Mm-hmm.
Is it difficult to transport them also without breaking them when you're assembling them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like your furniture. They all come apart. I create a diagram and instructions, and especially those pieces, the cactus pieces, those have been traveling around a lot. And at first I was very afraid of them breaking or anything. But now just with the instructions and reference images, people are able to assemble it. So they all come apart. They all kind of like stand on a gas pipe that is secure on a flange on the floor or on the pedestal, and they just kind of like are stacked up, or they also have wood or metal rods that connect to other components sticking out. So it's like this process of post stacking and pinning. Like some of these pieces, the smaller ones are attached on nichrome wire that you can fire on the kiln, and they already fit in a specific space that is created prior to that out. So, yeah, yep.
I was wondering what like prompted your switch from ceramics to more like metals, and if there was any like reasoning or symbolism behind the switch.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even show some of my older work, but to me, I'm interested about materials and what they bring as the histories that those materials bring, and also just I love experimenting. So I really started with photography, then drawing, graphic design, then back to drawing, then ceramics, and metals was just that opportunity through that residency. And just the knowledge that I had in ceramics was very applicable for that. The idea of making molds and sculpting those things in clay, then making the mold for metal. And I always try to combine those materials. This summer, I actually got lucky that I'm gonna be doing a residency at the Museum of Glass. So my proposal is to make one of these pieces in glass. How? I don't know. But once I get there, we'll figure it out. Question?
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? I think I've always thought about materiality a lot related to your work, and I think about materiality both from like the physical capacity of a material, but also like the social and historical and cultural capacity of the material. And I think of your work as using materials like ceramics and metal, but also like the materiality of organizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could talk about the materiality of organizing, or how you think of organizing materially.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. You know, I think, you know, when it comes to organizing, you know, like, I don't necessarily claim myself as a, you know, organizer or an activist. You know, to me, it's I make the work and people can categorize it however, or even like the work that I do. But the idea of that materiality that comes with organizing or meeting with people, to me, it's just, I think it's just part of feeling grateful to be part of a community of makers, whether it's in ceramics, pre-making, or these other groups. And to me is, if I can help someone else somehow, but then I don't even like the word help, you know. To me, that I don't want to come across like a savior or something like that, or someone that is just, I'm gonna help you. To me, it's about service. You know, we talk about service too a little bit. It's like serving those communities. It's creating access. It's making what it costs me money to go to school and all that stuff accessible to others who might not have the means. So I think that's why I'm interested in all those things. And even now, you know, I'm teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. It's a great privilege to teach there. I get paid to teach and make art, which is it's amazing. But then to me, that's not enough. So I feel like the need to supplement that with some sort of like community work that allows me to share the same quality of teaching or training, or just sharing information in general with communities who don't have the means to do that. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you so much.
Oh, there's a question over there.
One more?
Mhm.
Going off of like the idea of working with multiple materials, that resonates quite a bit as an artist. And I was thinking about like my first time painting a mural. I was so like scared, like I'm not gonna show myself publicly. You know, like maybe it's not the best example, but like, do you ever find yourself entering a new medium and experiencing some sort of intimidation with like, let's see if this works, or is it more playful for you, or how do you approach it?
Mhm. No, I mean, yes. I think to me, I like the being uncomfortable. You know, I think being uncomfortable, it just means that you're tapping into the unknown and you're about to learn something. Here's a good picture, for instance. When we were painting this mural, when I got to the scaffolding and I was all the way up there, I realized that I was afraid of heights. and you know, at that point, there was no turning point. I was like, all right, let's do this. Of course, we got some harness and safety first, but then after that, I just kind of like overcame that. And even with glass, you know, I haven't worked with glass before. I know that they have great glass personnel there that are gonna be able to train me or help me with what I'm making, but I was able to do like a paperweight, and that was terrifying. Like someone was like, "No, it's really easy here. Just get some," and I was just like, "This is not something that I do." But I'm glad that I pushed myself to do a little paperweight. That was enough for me to apply for this residency. And straight up being honest, I was like, have never done glass before. I've only done a paperweight, which is the most basic thing you can make. And they like the idea, and once I get there, I'll jump that, that I'll face it, no? Mm-hmm. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This might be similar to Brian's question, but a lot of your social art seems to be a combination of like art and mutual aid. I'm wondering what do you see as like specific to art that aids in that mutual aid in a way like that another action wouldn't. Does that make sense?
To me, art connects people, right? So that's like a nice entry point that we can use the subjectivity of art as a way of connecting with people and sharing ideas. So to me, that's a good entry point, and especially some of the community-based work is really fascinating when someone comes to an event that maybe they were not planning to be part of, and then they make something and they live with that satisfaction of, oh, I created something. And also in this case, in this project, we also use some very accessible materials like foam plates to make the prints. And a lot of what I noticed right away, a lot of the students or the participants who made a print right away were teaching the people who were coming and joining the project. And some art teachers were like, oh, I'm gonna do this with my students. So to me, that was great, like to just see how immediate the connection was. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about the project you made with toilet paper, where the installation had a toilet?
A toilet paper?
Yeah.
Is it here?
I don't know if you
Uh-huh.
on it, but I was curious.
I'm not sure. I don't think I have it here. But it's this piece where I literally use toilet paper and I created a carving of, I think it was the American emblem, I think that's what it was, a version of it. And I just made it to the size of the toilet paper of the square, like 4x4. And I just printed it in red and blue in that order. So it was 13 rolls of toilet paper hanging with making the American flag. And the title for that piece, it's Disposable Citizens. So that was, once again, when I think I was just done with undergrad, someone had canceled a show, and it was like a last minute invitation. Hey, you want to be part of this show? It opens Friday, and it was Wednesday. I was like, okay. And I had no idea what to do, and I just made this piece for that show. Let me see if I can pull it. This one, right? So that's how it came about. To me, it was about like all the invisible labor that a lot of the immigrant community does, and a lot of the times they almost treat it as disposable labor, like their bodies and everything gets abused, and then they don't get support beyond all the work that they do. So it was kind of like with that sentiment. Mm-hmm. I'm not a performance artist, but I don't know why I did that. I thought it was just funny. Mm-hmm. No, that's easy and cheap. Mm-hmm. Oh, the toilet, the actual toilet. I found it on the alley. Yeah, it was just, I cleaned it up a little bit and put it in there. Question?
Did you find that before or after you made that?
After. So it just happened, it was happenstance. It's like, I made the piece, I saw a toilet, I was like, oh, let me bring this there. It worked out, yeah.
Thank you so much, Salvador.
Thank you, yeah. Mm-hmm.